At 10:17 a.m. on February 26, 1941, the air in the underground briefing room at the Air Ministry was cold, damp, and smelled of stale tobacco and defeat. A reconnaissance photograph, grainy and stark, was projected onto a hanging screen. It showed a massive, graceful curve of masonry and stone, a serene white crescent cutting across a dark valley. This was the Moon Dam. To the men of Bomber Command, this was a photograph of an unkillable monster. "There it is, gentlemen," the Air Commodore said, his voice flat. "The primary battery of the Third Reich. It and its sisters, the Eder and the Sorp, are the heart of the Ruhr Valley." This was not a briefing for a mission. It was an admission of failure. This was a problem slide, the summary of a strategic impasse that was costing Britain the war. The target, the Moon, was not a wall. It was a mountain. It was a gravity dam, a 112-foot thick wedge of rock and concrete at its base, 1,400 feet long at its crest. It held back 134 million tons of water. This water was the lifeblood of Hitler's industrial heartland. It was the process water for the Krupp Steel Works. It powered the hydroelectric stations that ran the factories. It was the drinking water for the millions of workers who built the Panzers, the U-boats, and the Messerschmitts. "Destroy this," the Commodore said, tapping the screen with a wooden pointer, "and you stop the Ruhr. You cripple their steel production in a matter of weeks. You create a biblical flood." A junior officer, new to the command, spoke up. "Sir, why haven't we just bombed it?" The Commodore gave a weary sigh. He clicked to the next slide. It was a diagram of the dam in cross-section. "This is why," he said. He was pointing at the 112-foot thick base, and at the massive, placid lake behind it. "A conventional 1,000-pound bomb," he explained, "is a firecracker. If you drop it on the top of the dam, you will chip the masonry. You might knock a few bicycles off the road that runs along the crest. It will do nothing. The strength of a gravity dam is at its base. And the base is protected by 100 feet of water. The water was the shield. The very thing they wanted to release was the dam's primary defense." "So, a torpedo, sir," the junior officer pressed. "A naval weapon." The Commodore clicked again. The next slide was a reconnaissance photo, zoomed in on the water's surface. Two thick, parallel lines of steel booms and heavy netting stretched across the reservoir, about 50 feet apart, protecting the entire length of the dam wall. "The Germans, unfortunately, are not idiots," the Commodore snapped. Heavy-duty steel torpedo nets. They were in place before the war even began. Any torpedo dropped from the air will be caught in the first or second net, hundreds of yards from the dam. He clicked through a final series of photos. "And if you do decide to try," he said, his voice hardening, "this is what's waiting for you." The images were terrifying. Flak towers, 20mm cannons, dug into the hillsides at either end. Searchlight batteries. Barrage balloons tethered to the dam itself, their cables designed to shear the wing off any low-flying aircraft. And all of it, the entire Ruhr Valley, was defended by the densest concentration of anti-aircraft artillery on planet Earth, a flak valley from which few crews returned. This was the strategic failure. The methods of 1941 were useless against the target. Bomber Command was an area weapon designed to hit cities. It was blunt. It was inaccurate. This target required a surgeon's scalpel, but a scalpel that could deliver the force of an earthquake. In 1942, the problem was handed to Arthur "Bomber" Harris, the new, ruthless head of Bomber Command. He despised panacea targets. He believed only in the dehousing of the German workforce. But the dams remained, in the words of Prime Minister Winston Churchill, a target of the very highest strategic importance. Bomber Command had tried. In 1941, multiple raids by Hamptons and Wellingtons were sent. They were total failures. Planes were shot down just trying to find the dams in the dark, mist-filled valleys. One plane, in a suicidal act of bravery, dropped a 500-pound bomb that skipped off the water and hit a power station below the dam. It was a fluke, a one-in-a-million shot, and it did no real damage. The problem was insoluble. You couldn't bomb it. You couldn't torpedo it. Any crew sent against it was being sent to their death. The Damon problem was a dead end, a file stamped impossible and left to gather dust. Until, that is, a quiet, brilliant, and utterly eccentric civilian engineer at the Vickers Armstrong's aircraft company named Barnes Wallace saw the file. He was not a munitions expert. He was an aircraft designer. He had built airships. He had designed the geodetic weave of the Wellington bomber. And he, a man who saw the world in terms of physics and equations, believed he had a solution. It was a solution so counterintuitive, so bizarre, and so physically audacious that the Air Ministry would, for months, dismiss him as a crackpot. His idea? He was going to use the water, the dam's own shield, as the weapon against it. Step 1 of 10 complete. The word count is 991 words. This step establishes the hook, the indestructible nature of the dams, the strategic importance of the Ruhr, the failure of conventional methods, and the defenses. It introduces the protagonist as the man with the mad idea. In 1942, precision bombing was a cruel joke. The British public, fed a diet of heroic newsreels, believed their bombers were striking Hitler's war machine with surgical accuracy. The men in power, however, knew the terrifying truth, and that truth had a name: the Butt Report. In August 1941, David Ben-Susan Butt, a civil servant in the War Cabinet Secretariat, was tasked with a simple, horrifying audit. He was given 650 recent reconnaissance photos from RAF bombing raids. His job was to compare them against the crew's own post-mission reports. The results were so catastrophic they were classified for decades. The Butt Report found that of all the aircraft crews who claimed to have attacked their designated target, only 1 in 3, 33%, had dropped their bombs within 5 miles of it. A 5-mile radius is a 78.5 square mile area. This was not precision. This was scattering bombs across an entire county, with the target somewhere in the middle. And that was the average. Over the heavily defended, industrial black hole of the Ruhr Valley, the very place the dams lived, the numbers fell off a cliff. There, where the flak was thickest and the industrial haze was a permanent shroud, only 1 in 10, 10%, of all crews got their bombs within that same 5-mile radius. This was the standard. A Lancaster bomber, the pride of the fleet, would fly for hours in the dark, navigating by dead reckoning, a system of a map, a stopwatch, and a prayer. The navigator would guide them through the deadliest curtain of anti-aircraft fire ever assembled, the Camubur Line, a 600-mile-long defensive belt of radar stations, searchlight batteries, and night fighter bases. If they survived, the bomb aimer, lying on his stomach in the nose, would have perhaps 60 seconds over the target area. He was peering through a simple, mechanically computed, course-setting bomb sight, CSBS, trying to spot a blacked-out factory in a blacked-out city from 18,000 feet, while 88mm flak shells burst around the aircraft, rocking it so violently it was like trying to thread a needle in an earthquake. The 50% circular error probable, the circle where half the bombs were expected to land, was, for the very best crews on a clear night, over 1,200 yards across. The crest of the Moan Dam was 25 feet wide. The statistical probability of a high-altitude bomber hitting it was not low. It was 0. It was a rounding error. Knowing this, the military solution was to simply give up on precision and embrace terror. This was the logic that gave Bomber Harris his mandate: if you cannot hit the factory, hit the city. Burn the workers' homes. The Area Bombing Directive of 1942 was a direct admission of this technical and tactical failure. But the dams were not a city. They were a single, specific, technical target. And the official solutions for this panacea target were a parade of failures. Official failure number 1, the torpedo. The Royal Navy was the first to propose a solution. A standard 18-inch aerial torpedo, they argued, could be dropped. This was the weapon of Taranto and Bismarck. Why it failed, the physics. A torpedo of that era weighed 1,600 pounds and needed to be dropped from 60 to 100 feet. But more critically, it needed 60 feet of water depth just for the drop, to absorb the impact. The reservoirs, especially at the Eder, were often too shallow near the edges. The enemy's veto, the Germans, as noted, were not fools. They had suspended heavy-duty steel nets 100 yards out from the dam wall. The torpedo, a weapon that runs at a depth of 15 to 20 feet, would detonate harmlessly against this netting. The mining torpedo variant, the Admiralty's next idea was a torpedo that would dive under the nets. This was theoretically possible. But the Mohn's base was 112 feet thick. The warhead of a standard torpedo was 500 pounds of TNT. It was a pea shooter. It would scuff the masonry and annoy the guards. The Admiralty calculated they would need 7 torpedoes, striking the exact same 10-foot square patch of concrete in succession, to drill a hole. This was pure fantasy. Official failure number 2, the brute force bomb. Bomber Command's solution was simple: if a small bomb doesn't work, use a big one. Why it failed: the water. The dam's primary defense was the 134 million tons of water it held back. Water is incompressible. This is a fundamental law of physics. The Air Ministry ran the numbers. A 4,000 pounds cookie bomb, a massive weapon, detonating 50 feet from the dam wall would be a damp squib. The incompressible water would not transmit the blast shockwave sideways into the wall. Instead, it would absorb the energy and vent it upwards, in the path of least resistance. The result would be a spectacular, 500-foot-high plume of water, an explosion of sound and fury, signifying absolutely nothing. The dam would be untouched. To break the dam, a 4,000 pounds bomb would need to be physically touching the concrete base, 100 feet down. This was impossible. This was the dead end. By late 1942, the dam's file was closed. The official position of the Air Ministry was that the target was technically unfeasible. The loss rates over the Ruhr, already a catastrophic 5% per mission, made any special attempt a guaranteed suicide run. The old methods were failing, and the cost in air crews, thousands of young men, was already too high. The moment was not a single flash of genius. It was a chain reaction of two brilliant, counterintuitive ideas, born from a childlike observation and forged by complex physics. The first moment came from Barnes Wallis's past, from a memory of the 17th-century naval hero, Admiral Nelson. Wallis, an avid student of history and physics, was famous for his later life discovery of skipping stones on water. He wasn't just playing, he was calculating. He knew from his own experiments and his historical reading that a cannonball, fired at a low angle, wouldn't just sink. It would skip across the surface, retaining its velocity. This was the solution to the official failure of the torpedo nets. The complex, official solutions were all failing. The military was trying to invent new types of torpedoes that could dive under the nets, or massive bombs that would somehow survive being dropped from 30,000 feet to penetrate the water. Wallis's solution was elegant in its simplicity: don't go under them. Go over them. He would not invent a new torpedo. He would turn the bomb itself into a skipping stone. The idea was audacious. A bomb, by definition, is designed to be dropped. It is aerodynamic. It is meant to fall true. Wallis wanted to do the opposite. He wanted to project a massive explosive horizontally across the surface of the water, like a cannonball, so it would physically leap over the nets. This solved the first problem. But it immediately created a second, far more difficult one: so what? Even if a bomb could be made to skip over the nets, it would then strike the dam wall, and sink. As the Air Ministry had already proven, a 4,000 pounds bomb sinking 10, 20, or even 50 feet away from the dam wall would be useless. The incompressible water would cushion the blow, venting the explosion's energy upwards in a harmless plume. This is where the second moment occurred. This was the true genius. Wallis, the fluid dynamics expert, knew he needed to solve two problems. Proximity: the bomb must be in direct, physical contact with the dam wall. Depth: the bomb must detonate at the base of the dam, where the hydrostatic pressure was greatest and the masonry was under maximum stress. How could he make a bomb that skipped, then hit the wall, and then sink, not harmlessly into the silt 50 feet away, but scrape down the face of the dam wall as it sank? The solution came to him in January 1942, while playing in his garden. He was spinning a marble. He noticed that if he spun the marble backwards before rolling it, it would hit a wall, and instead of bouncing away, it would climb or stick to the wall as it dropped. Backspin. This was the key. It was the irrelevant physics of a child's toy. If the skipping bomb was also spinning backward at high speed, e.g., 500 revolutions per minute, the moment its forward momentum was stopped by the dam, the residual spin would take over. The gyroscopic and hydrostatic forces would cause the bomb to grip the concrete, forcing it tight against the dam's face and making it crawl down the wall as it sank. It wouldn't drift away. It would sink like a depth charge, but a depth charge with claws. Now Wallace had his full theory. A cylindrical, bouncing bomb, not an aerodynamic one. Dropped at an impossibly low altitude, 60 feet, and high speed, 240 miles per hour. Spinning with heavy backspin, 500 revolutions per minute. It would skip over the torpedo nets. It would strike the dam wall. The backspin would stick it to the concrete. It would sink to the base, 30 to 40 feet down. A hydrostatic fuse would detonate it. The final piece was the physics of the explosion itself. This was Wallace's structural failure expertise. The Air Ministry had failed because they thought in terms of gas pressure. An explosion is a rapid expansion of gas. Water, being incompressible, would muffle this. Wallace was thinking about the shockwave. He was designing a bomb, codenamed Upkeep, to create a bubble of expanding gas in direct contact with the dam, 30 feet down. Because the bomb was pressed against the concrete, the expanding gas bubble would act like a giant hydraulic ram. Simultaneously, the explosion would send a violent, high-frequency shockwave traveling through the incompressible water, not upwards, but sideways. This shockwave, moving at the speed of sound in water, nearly 5,000 feet per second, would strike the dam wall. The dam was already under millions of tons of pressure from the reservoir water. It was a structure in tension. Wallace's bomb wouldn't be a push. It would be a punch. A single, massive, hydraulic shock pulse, like a hammer blow from an earthquake. It would break the dam's back, creating a massive crack. The dam's own water pressure would then do the rest, tearing the 112-foot-thick wall apart like paper. The prototype was absurd. It looked nothing like a bomb. It was an oil drum, bin, weighing 9,500 pounds, filled with 6,600 pounds of Torpex, a new, incredibly powerful underwater explosive. It was to be held in a special V-shaped cradle under a Lancaster bomber, and spun up to speed by a small, dedicated motor. The Air Ministry thought he was insane. Barnes-Wallace's backspin theory was not met with applause. It was met with a wall of bureaucratic contempt. In the unforgiving, statistics-driven world of the Air Ministry, he was not a visionary, he was a crackpot, and a dangerous one. The primary no came from the single most powerful man in Bomber Command, Air Chief Marshal Sir Arthur "Bomber" Harris. Harris was a man of brutal, singular focus. He was waging a war of attrition, a campaign of dehousing and area bombing that he believed was the only way to win. His entire strategy was based on the hard, bloody lessons of the Butt Report, that precision was a lie. He was in the business of sending 800 bombers a night to burn down a city, and he was losing 5% of his force every time. To Harris, Wallace's proposal was an infuriating, almost insulting, fantasy. "This is a panacea target," Harris wrote in a scathing memo. "I have been presented with dozens of them. They are a distraction from the main effort." Harris's rejection was rooted in the cold, hard math of his own failure. He was losing men every night because they couldn't hit a city from 18,000 feet. Now, this civilian engineer was demanding his best aircraft, the brand new Avro Lancasters, to fly a mission that required hitting a 25-foot wide target, in the dark, in a valley, on the first pass. But the impossibility of the navigation was only the first violation. The flight parameters Wallace demanded were not just a breach of regulations, they were a violation of the laws of survival. The impossible regulations. The altitude, the RAF survival doctrine was, fly high. 18,000 to 20,000 feet was the minimum to stay above the lethal, light flak, 20 mm and 37 mm cannons. Wallace's calculations demanded a drop altitude of 60 feet. This was not low level, this was insane. At 60 feet, the bombers were not just visible, they were below the level of the surrounding hills. They would be flying inside the flak envelope, vulnerable to every machine gun, every rifle, every pistol on the ground. The speed, they had to fly at exactly 240 miles per hour. Not 230. Not 250. This was the precise velocity needed for the bomb to skip the correct number of times. But a Lancaster, a 30-ton heavy bomber, was a lumbering beast. It was not a fighter. Flying it at 240 miles per hour, 60 feet off the water, in the dark, gave the pilot zero margin for error. A momentary lapse, a downdraft, a sneeze, and the plane would hook a wingtip in the water and disintegrate. The range, the bomb had to be released at a precise distance from the dam wall, 425 yards. Not 450. Not 400. In the dark, in a valley, with no radar, how was a bomb aimer supposed to measure 425 yards to a target he could barely see, while approaching it at 350 feet per second? The weapon, Wallace was asking for Lancasters to be ripped apart. The bomb bay doors had to be removed. The bomb, a 9,500-pound spinning, oil drum, would hang outside the plane, destroying its aerodynamics. The special motor needed to spin it up to 500 revolutions per minute was an unauthorized, untested modification. Harris's no was absolute. He refused to release his Lancasters. "I am not going to waste my aircraft on this harebrained scheme," he declared. "The only person who will be killed is the test pilot." If Wallace failed, the consequences would be catastrophic. For him, it would be the end of his career, a national embarrassment. For the RAF, it would be a propaganda gift to Goebbels, an entire elite squadron wiped out on a lunatic's errand. For Sir Charles Portal, the chief of the air staff, who was quietly listening to Wallace, it would be a career-ending blunder. Wallace, facing this wall, did what all great innovators do: he broke the chain of command. He was a civilian. He didn't answer to Harris. He used his connections, leveraging his reputation as the Wellington's designer. He got his proposal to Bomber Harris's boss, Sir Charles Portal. Portal was a different kind of thinker. He saw the strategic chess game. He understood what crippling the Ruhr would mean. He looked at Wallace's math, the physics of the shockwave, the films of the first small-scale tests, and he believed him. In a move of incredible bureaucratic courage, Portal overruled Bomber Harris. On February 26, 1943, Portal issued a directive. Harris was ordered to provide the Lancasters. He was ordered to form a new, elite squadron for this one, single, impossible mission. The rebellion was now complete. The risk had been formalized. Portal had staked his reputation, Harris had been forced to stake his aircraft, and Wallace had staked his entire theory. Now, they just needed a man to lead the suicide mission. They needed a man who could take this madness and turn it into a drill. They needed a pilot who was not just the best, but who was a ruthless, obsessive, and brilliant leader. They found him in 24-year-old Wing Commander Guy Gibson. Gibson was already a legend, a veteran of over 170 missions, a survivor who should, by all rights, have been dead. He was exhausted, on the verge of a breakdown. When he was called to headquarters, he assumed it was for a desk job. Instead, he was told he had 8 weeks. 8 weeks to form a new squadron, from scratch. 8 weeks to train them to fly at 60 feet, in the dark, at 240 miles per hour. 8 weeks to perfect a mission that every senior officer in Bomber Command, including his new boss, Bomber Harris, believed was technically impossible and tactically suicidal. Gibson's personal risk was immediate. He wasn't risking his career. He was risking his life, and the 133 lives of the men he was about to handpick for the new 617 Squadron. At 0:20 on the morning of May 17, 1943, Wing Commander Guy Gibson was at 60 feet, flying at 240 miles per hour, and heading straight for a wall of fire. His aircraft, G-4 George, was the first. The 9 Lancasters of the primary attack wave had crossed the Dutch coast, flying so low they were clipping treetops and blowing tiles off roofs, their navigators desperately map-reading by moonlight. They had dodged power lines and flak towers, a 30-ton ballet of shadows, and now they were here. The Moan Valley. It was a serene, moonlit, perfect trap. "My God," Gibson's bomb aimer, John Pulford, whispered over the intercom. It's just like the model." It was. The silvery lake, the graceful, 1,400-foot crescent of the dam, the 2 towers on the crest. And the defenses. The Germans were awake. As Gibson began his attack run, lining up over the water, the valley erupted. Searchlights, dozens of them, snapped on, their blue-white beams locking onto the Lancaster, blinding the cockpit. Then the flak opened up. Red, green, and white 20mm tracers arced up from the hillsides, creating a solid, impenetrable wall of light. It was not a curtain of fire, it was a tunnel of it, and Gibson was flying directly into its mouth. "Stand by!" Gibson yelled, his voice strained, fighting the yoke to keep the plane steady. Altitude 60 feet. Speed 240. Flight engineer John Spafford, his head out of the cockpit bubble, was screaming the altitude, his eyes fixed on the 2 converging spotlights on the black, churning water. "Down a bit, sir." "Down." "Up." "Hold her." 60 feet. "Steady, steady." In the nose, Pulford was hunched over his simple, wooden, sight, staring into the inferno. The dam wall was rushing at them at 350 feet per second. Not yet, left, steady, steady." Tracers were slamming into the aircraft. The sound was like a hammer on the fuselage, pang pang pang. The rear gunner was screaming, "Gunners, open fire! Fire at the towers!" The Lancaster's .303 machine guns replied, a futile-sounding pop 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 against the cannonade. "Now!" Pulford screamed. "Bomb gone!" Gibson hauled the Lancaster into a violent, climbing turn. The 9,500 pounds, upkeep, mine, spinning at 500 revolutions per minute, dropped from the belly, hit the water, and worked. Skip. 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 The dustbin bounced 4 times, leaping 100 yards at a pass, exactly as Wallace had drawn it. It struck the dam wall dead center. The backspin gripped. It sank. 30 seconds later, a colossal, 500-foot-high column of water and white foam erupted behind them, as if a volcano had been born in the lake. The shockwave hit Gibson's climbing Lancaster, tossing it like a leaf. Gibson circled back. His heart sank. The flak was still firing. The searchlights were still on. And the dam was still there. The water was not pouring through. "No breach," he reported, his voice numb. "No breach. Stand by, M, for Mother. You're next." Squadron leader John Hopgood began his run. The Germans were now fully alert. They had his range. They had his altitude. He flew into the same tunnel of 20mm fire. He was hit. He was hit again. His port wing was on fire. His port inner engine was on fire. Hoppy held the plane steady. He did not waver. He was a dead man, but he was going to deliver his bomb. 60 feet. Hold her. He was too low. The bomb, released late, skipped over the dam wall and landed in the power station below, exploding in a massive fireball that momentarily lit up the whole valley. Hopgood's Lancaster, a streaming comet, clawed for altitude. It cleared the hill, barely. Then it exploded, killing all but 2 of the crew. One run. One miss. One plane lost. Stand by, P4 Pops, Gibson ordered, his voice hardening. Squadron leader H.M. Dingy Young, the man Gibson had taunted in training, began his run. Gibson, in a moment of selfless, suicidal genius, made a decision. I'm coming in with you. I'll draw their fire. Gibson dived his own bullet-riddled Lancaster back into the valley. He flew parallel to Young, inside the flak, his gunners firing, drawing the attention of the German gun crews. Fire at me, you bastards! Fire at me! It worked. The flak, confused, split its attention. Young's Lancaster roared through the gap. Bomb gone. Skip. 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 Hit. Sink. Another volcanic eruption of water. Gibson circled. The wall was still holding. Stand by, for Apple. Flight Lieutenant David Maltby. David, I'm coming in with you. Gibson flew his third pass into hell, his plane now barely controllable. Maltby's run was perfect. The spotlights kissed. The wooden sight aligned. Bomb gone. Skip. 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 Hit. Sink. A third massive explosion. Gibson, circling in the moonlight, watched. He held his breath. This time was different. The plume of water was different. And at the center of the dam wall, where the three bombs had struck, a dark line appeared. It was a crack. He watched, mesmerized, as the crack widened. A small, dark V. The 134 million tons of water, the incompressible shield, was now the weapon. The pressure found the weakness, the hammer blow crack from Wallace's shockwave. The V became a gash. The gash became a breach. It's gone. It's gone. Gibson screamed over the radio. She's broken. At 0:56 a.m., the Moan Dam, 112 feet thick, a mountain of concrete and stone, tore apart. A glittering, 30-foot-high, 300-foot-wide wall of churning water and debris began to thunder down the valley, an apocalyptic flood moving at 20 miles per hour, ripping the power station from its foundations. The debriefing was a surreal mix of elation and exhaustion. Gibson landed, his plane shot to ribbons, and drank a cup of tea. Barnes Wallace, who had been waiting by the phone all night, received the call. Gibson. Gibson broke it, the operations officer said. Wallace, the cool, detached scientist, broke down. He wept. The impossible mission, the mad theory, had been proven. The first test was a success. But the night was not over. The second wave was already en route to the Eder. The before was a statistical failure. Bomber Command, prior to May 1943, was an inaccurate area weapon, its crews unable to hit a target within a 5-mile radius, its precision raids on the dams a total, costly failure. The after, in the 24 hours following 0:56 a.m. on May 17, 1943, was an apocalyptic success. The numbers, when they were compiled by Allied reconnaissance and German High Command, were not just good. They were biblical. The before and after of the Ruhr Valley. Before midnight, May 17, the Moan and Eder dams are at 95% capacity, holding back over 3.3 billion tons of water. The Ruhr's industrial heartland is operating at peak efficiency. After 8 o'clock, May 17, the Moan and Eder dams are 100% breached. A tidal wave, described in German reports as an unglaubliche Wasserwand, an unbelievable wall of water, 30 feet high and moving at 20 miles per hour, has scoured 60 miles of the Ruhr and Eder valleys. The measurable impact. The flood's impact was not just tactical, it was a strategic catastrophe for the Third Reich. Water production, the primary target. The waterworks of the Ruhr, the process water for steel, lost 75% of its capacity overnight. This was the battery that Wallace had targeted. Power production, 11 power stations were destroyed. Dozens more were damaged. The grid that powered the factories was crippled. Factories, 114 factories, including critical armaments and steel plants, were either destroyed or severely damaged. Over 25,000 acres of farmland were flooded. Infrastructure: the floodwaters obliterated the valley's infrastructure. 25 bridges were destroyed. Miles of primary railway lines were washed away, twisting steel rails like pretzels. The human cost: 1,650 people were killed by the flood. Over 1,000 of these were Soviet and Polish forced laborers, trapped in camps in the valleys below the dams. The German reaction was not anger. It was panic. Reichsminister Albert Speer, Hitler's brilliant minister of armaments, received the news by phone at 3 a.m. He called it a catastrophe. He knew instantly what this meant. The Ruhr, the engine of the Wehrmacht, was drowning. Speer's personal report to Hitler, written 24 hours later, is the ultimate, measurable result of the raid. It is a document of pure, unadulterated panic. The Möhne Dam has been breached. The loss of water is catastrophic for the Ruhr. Steel production will be paralyzed. It is a disaster of the first order. The power stations are gone. The waterworks are gone. This endangers the entire war effort. Hitler was furious. He ordered 20,000 Organization Todt workers, the elite Nazi civil engineering corps, to be pulled off the Atlantic Wall, the defenses in France, and sent immediately to the Ruhr. This was the turning point. In the critical months of May, June, and July 1943, the exact same period that the Wehrmacht was preparing for Operation Citadel, the massive, war-deciding tank battle at Kursk, Hitler was forced to divert his most critical resources. Manpower: 20,000 elite engineers were not building bunkers at Normandy. They were shoveling mud in the Ruhr. Anti-aircraft: the Luftwaffe was forced to pull hundreds of its 88mm and 20mm flak cannons away from the Eastern Front to protect every other dam, bridge, and canal in Germany. Fighter squadrons: night fighter wings were recalled from other fronts to create a dam patrol, flying endless, fuel-wasting circles over targets that were not being attacked. The bouncing bomb had done more than flood a valley. It had functioned as a massive, strategic magnet, pulling German defenses inward, away from the invasion beaches and away from the Russian front, at the most critical juncture of the war. The raid's success was not just physical, it was psychological. It was the first time in the war that precision bombing had been proven to work. It was a staggering blow to German morale and an electrifying jolt to the Allies. The cost, however, was brutal. Of the 19 Lancasters that flew, 8 were lost. Of the 133 men who took off, 53 were killed. 3 were captured. That is a 42% casualty rate. It was a suicidal, impossible mission. And it had worked. The mad, civilian engineers theory, implemented by a single squadron of elite pilots, had delivered a blow from which Hitler's industrial heartland would never fully recover. The panacea target had been real after all. Step 9 of 10 complete. The word count is 907 words. This step provides the before and after statistics, the measurable industrial impact, the German reaction, Speer's report, and the turning point of diverting resources from the Atlantic Wall and Eastern Front. The thundering wall of water that burst from the Möhne and Eder dams on May 17, 1943, receded in a matter of days, but the shockwave it sent through military and engineering history continues to resonate. The fate of the protagonist. Barnes Wallis was no longer a mad civilian. He was a national hero. The morning after the raid, the man who had been dismissed, mocked, and blocked by the military establishment was hailed as a genius. His obsession with structural failure and impossible physics was now a national asset. He was given a budget of £3 million, billions in today's money, and a blank check to continue his work. His rebellious ideas were now the priority. From the bouncing principle of upkeep, he scaled up. He created the Tallboy, a 12,000-pound, armor-piercing, earthquake bomb. Dropped from 20,000 feet, it reached supersonic speed and could penetrate 16 feet of solid concrete. The Grand Slam, the apex of his work. A 22,000 pounds monster, the Tallboy's big brother, which would create a camouflage, a massive underground cavern, that would collapse the foundations of invulnerable targets like U-boat pens, bridges, and railway viaducts. 617 Squadron, the Dam Busters, became Wallace's personal delivery service. They were the only ones with the skill to drop his new weapons. With the Tallboy, they sank the German battleship Tirpitz, a target that had resisted every other form of attack for years. With the Grand Slam, they destroyed the Bielefeld viaduct, shattering it with a single, foundation-collapsing blow. Barnes-Wallace was knighted in 1968. He had proven that one man, armed with impeccable physics, obsessive curiosity, and a refusal to take no for an answer, could be more powerful than a military bureaucracy. He died in 1979, revered as one of the 20th century's greatest engineers. His legacy is in the simple moral: the mad idea is often the only one that will work. The fate of the innovation. The bouncing bomb, or upkeep, was a one-time-use weapon. It was a scalpel, designed for a single, specific operation. It was never used again. Its precision was superseded by its own, larger children, the Tallboy and Grand Slam. But the legacy of the innovation was profound. It was the birth of the smart bomb era. Operation Chastise was the first true, systems-based, precision strike in history. It was not just a bomb, it was a system. A modified aircraft, the Lancaster. A unique weapon, the spinning upkeep. A new training doctrine, low-level, high-speed flight. A new guidance system, the 60-foot spotlights and the 425-yard wooden Y sight. This was the first time an end-to-end solution had been developed for a single, impossible target. It was the conceptual grandfather of every laser-guided bomb, every GPS-guided missile, and every stealth fighter-bomber program that followed. It proved that, instead of sending 1,000 planes to hit a city, it was far more effective to send one plane, with one perfect weapon, to hit one vital linchpin. The fate of the Dam Busters. Guy Gibson, the 24-year-old who led the raid, was awarded the Victoria Cross, Britain's highest medal for valor. He was instantly grounded, deemed too valuable a hero to risk. He was sent on a morale-boosting tour of the United States. He hated it. He was a warrior, not a celebrity. He chafed at his desk job. In 1944, he pulled every string he had and managed to get himself assigned to one last mission as a Mosquito fighter-bomber pilot. On September 19, 1944, his aircraft crashed in the Netherlands. He was 26 years old. 617 Squadron lived on as the elite of Bomber Command. They took on the impossible targets no one else could, using Wallace's earthquake bombs. Their squadron badge, approved by the King, is a graphical representation of the mission, a dam wall, breached, with 3 blue lightning bolts representing the raid, the squadron, and the water. Their motto, adopted after the raid, is Après moi, le déluge, after me, the flood. Today, the graves of the 53 aircrew who died on the raid are lined up in the Reichswald Forest War Cemetery. The Moan and Eder dams were rebuilt, and today are popular tourist destinations. But at the Moan, a small plaque on the dam wall honors the men who, on a moonlit night in 1943, flew 60 feet above the water, in the face of impossible odds, to deliver a weapon born from a child's toy.